Here's a headline. This is from Raw Story from Obama supporters. You can actually read her quotes. Kagan supported detaining terror suspects indefinitely without trial, including U.S. citizens. That's your new Supreme Court nominee to be the next justice. Dissenters to be detained as enemy belligerents. This is the bill introduced by John McCain and others. And it says that any high-value detainee, including citizens at the direction of the Pentagon, Department of Defense, or the President, that you can be secretly arrested for any matters such as the President considers and secretly stripped of your citizenship, and you can be given enhanced interrogation. Only an act of Congress can have you even released. Just total end of our system. Here's another article today. Kagan, disappear free speech if the government deems it offensive. We have the links to the article she's written. And she is an acolyte of Larry Summers, and of course a minion of the White House regulations czar Cass Sunstein, that says, and you can go pull up his quotes, he wrote a white paper, that if you disagree with man-made global warming, you should be arrested. It should be outlawed. I mean, imagine, we're about to have a Supreme Court justice that says we can ban speech in America. I mean, this is just, it's so bold, Webster, and I bet the Republicans are going to slide her right in there. I mean, they love this too. This is right up their alley. I mean, these people are absolute criminals. I mean, to be someone who wants to be a Supreme Court justice, who wants to ban free speech and habeas corpus, that is treason, is it not?
I guess I would say so. But here's the thing. In line with my general rule that the center of evil is Wall Street, always.
And she's one of their minions. She's a Goldman Sachs.
She's from Goldman Sachs. This is the main point. Goldman Sachs, Goldman Sachs, Goldman Sachs. Let's have another representative of Goldman Sachs taking over the government, right? It's not enough to have Geithner. It's not enough to have Summers. Geithner's chief of staff.
Paulson, Bernanke, all the major regulatory agents.
Goldman Sachs, or if not Goldman Sachs, the same thing, J.P. Morgan Chase, Citibank, and so forth. So this woman represents what was known in the 1930s as totalitarian liberalism. And this was associated with Keynes. I don't think that Keynes was anything good, even though you somehow have to talk about him in terms of economics from time to time, just to make clear what you're talking about. She's a totalitarian liberal, and that's what this stuff comes down to. I think, though, we've got to also realize what's going on in the world. If we go back to the 1930s, we see a three-part process. You have depression. Depression leads to dictatorship, right? The Depression leads to Hitler, frankly, right? Nazism, and that leads to World War. Now, we're still in the beginning, or the second phase of the Depression phase. The question, therefore, is stop the Depression. If you don't stop the Depression, you will have necessarily, practically automatically, the collapse of representative government, the collapse of democratic institutions, the collapse of the rule of law is inevitably going to be swept away. You can see.
But how much more obvious does it have to get where you're J.P. Morgan Chase or Goldman Sachs or Citigroup or Wells Fargo in every position? Soon you won't be able to be a county judge unless you're one of their people, and I see them doing that. A dog catcher. You won't be able, I mean, literally, will Goldman Sachs people start wearing gold crowns and call themselves Emperor Maximilian III?
Well, remember, I would actually argue that J.P. Morgan Chase and probably Morgan Stanley represent even a higher level of this stuff. And
yeah, their criminal crew.
Higher levels, right? Insurance companies in general sometimes represent a higher level of...
Well, they were the ones that passed the health care bill that's really money for them.
So, but the idea, therefore, is, I would say, it's time to develop an awareness of what this is. This is Wall Street owns Washington in the same way that it owns everything else. And if
it's like a third world country run by the bankers. Stay there, back in 70 seconds with the final hour.
Waging war on corruption. Alex Jones on the GCM Radio Network.
I just want to say at the start of this fourth and final hour that I am so proud of my entire team. The radio production team, the TV production team, the filmmakers, the webmasters, the writers, the work we're doing at Infowars.com and PrisonPlanet.com. Just incredible news and information, a roadmap, a blueprint for what's happening in our world and how to take our society back. Michael Bagnerick, former nominee for the Libertarian Party for president, will be joining us. Barely survived a heart attack a few months ago, but he's up and fighting. He is coming up in the next segment. Webster, I mean, it's the top 6 global banks, maybe 10 if you count some big European banks, openly running around robbing everyone, creating counterfeit derivative crap that they started pushing in the late 90s, selling it to everyone, destroying everything, laughing at us. They're so full of arrogance, and they're now got a Supreme Court nominee who says ban free speech and writes public papers on it. I mean, she shouldn't be able to be a county judge, much less a toilet attendant, and they're just driving forward. I don't see how they could be successful. I mean, I see it as good news that Sarkozy's barely hanging on in France, that Merkel's barely hanging on, that even though new puppets are coming in like shark teeth behind her, that this is a sign. Look at Gordon Brown. So clearly, this is very unpopular. It's illegal. In the last 4 minutes, not what you want to happen, and we had you on about your great political ideas and economic ideas, but what you think is happening. I mean, how do you see this playing out looking further? 2-3 years from now, not what you want to happen, but where do you think we'll be 3 years from now?
Well, again, I believe in human liberty, and I believe in redemption, so I'd have to factor that in. But in terms of the Depression, in the previous Depression, you had 3 waves. It would have had more, but it came to an end in various countries. You had the crash of October 1929 is the first wave. Then a year and a half later, you have the collapse of Europe. Starts in Austria, Germany, Hungary, Central Europe, then Britain. So Europe is absolutely destroyed in the summer of 1931. Then in June, say, of 1932, you get the panic in the banks of Chicago and Illinois. And then rapidly it goes through various state banking systems, through Nevada, through Louisiana, despite the efforts of Huey Long, through Michigan, despite the efforts of Henry Ford. And by the last day of Hoover, every bank in the United States had shut down, and if they hadn't had a bank holiday on that following Monday, they would have all been bankrupt. You would have had an absolutely chaotic, calamitous situation. So we're now in the beginning of the second wave. We're basically back here in May, June of 1931. So we see what we're headed towards now, unless policies are radically changed, and that we can say. If you don't change your policy radically, you're going to have the chaotic breakup of the euro, the chaotic breakup of the European Central Bank. The British pound will be pulled into it, and the euro-dollar market. Now, I think that the gap, the time lapse between the second wave and the third wave now is likely to be very quick. In other words, it's not going to take 6 months for the crisis to come back here. And therefore, panic runs on the dollar, panic runs on the Federal Reserve. Japan might constitute some kind of an interlude because of their huge debt, but also, again, because...
So are you talking about a year or 6 months?
I think you're talking about less than a year, but this is very hard to say. I think the more important is the order of events. So you'll know where you are, not by the calendar, but by what's happening. Look,
and we'll have the media, because we're almost out of time, will be telling us that we're in milk and honey when 100 million Americans are on food stamps, not 40 million.
Look, there were panic runs on the Federal Reserve. There was a panic run on the New York branch of the Federal Reserve in the spring of 1933. There was a panic run on the Bank of International Settlements in the spring of 1933. So when you get into the third wave, which is also disintegration of national banking systems, you've also got these institutions going down. Ultimately, a panic run on the International Monetary Fund. If the IMF lends out 300 billion euros, $400 billion, then that sets them up for bankruptcy and panic.
All right, Webster, we're out of time.
All fall down.
And of course, the ace in the hole is they're going to start a war with Iran to smokescreen this, probably in the next year.
Possibly, yes. That becomes more likely as their hysteria and desperation.
Good job, Webster.